Look at the energy in this room. Isn't it amazing? Thank you all for coming here today. And you really, really supported us so fast. And we never thought this was going to be possible. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. Let me introduce myself. I'm Indu Vijayan, and I'm Senior Technical Product Manager at AI. And I'm one of the founding members of Women in Autonomy at our company. One of the reasons we have Women in Autonomy, the reason it came into being because there was a lack of gender diversity in the meeting rooms that we had, whether be it core technical or business. There's an ultimate lack of people, women, and we are underrepresented and our voices are not really heard. So we created this forum as a means for women in automotive and auto tech industry to come together, network, encourage, and educate all the women out there and to bring our voices together and make us heard and be represented. Our goal is that through these regular events and meetups, we help empower women today, drive the next generation of leaders through your guidances and help, and accelerate the future of automotive. And so far, the reception has been overwhelming. So we basically have this event up on the website, and in 2 days it was sold out, as you all know. We were like so overwhelmed with that. Anyway, I'm not going to go on with any of these discussions. I know we are here to hear from all of you guys here. So without much further ado, I would like to welcome Stacey Randecker here. She is the co-host of Flying Car show, radio and podcast, and she discusses everything about transformation of transportation. So Stacey, welcome, and I hand over the baton to you to introduce.
Thank you, Indu. Thank you, AI and Women in Autonomy. It's a pleasure to be here at the inaugural event. We're going to keep this really tight and brief because we got a lot to talk about. So I am going to let my panelists introduce themselves. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm Jennifer Haroon. I'm the COO at Nauto. And at Nauto, our mission is to make driving smarter and safer. And we do that through a hardware and software system that uses computer vision and deep learning to detect events and help drivers prevent collisions.
I'm Manuela. I'm the COO of DeepMap, and DeepMap makes HD maps for self-driving cars.
And I'm Manuela Papadopol. I'm the CEO of Designated Driver, and Designated Driver is building technology for teleoperations, which is a safety net for autonomy. So I think we have a lot in common. We rely a lot on each other.
HD maps make cars safe too.
They do.
And just to check, we have one microphone for the speakers to share. Were you all able to hear our speakers introduce themselves?
Yes.
Yep.
So if we don't have the microphone, I mean, try and pass it around, but if not, I think, just speak up a bit more and everyone will be able to hear. Okay. And yes, this is me, please feel free to tweet for the event, at us, etc. Connect with us on LinkedIn, look us up about us so we can get down to the good stuff. Okay, so for over a century, our transportation ecosystem and the landscape of players has remained largely the same. And many of the gender and faces as well. That's why we're here. Technology and innovation amounted to modest improvements in safety and consumer comfort in the last 20 years. There have been rumblings toward the future with the DARPA challenges in autonomous drive, the bombshell that is Tesla, and the Pandora's box of Uber and Lyft. We've come a very long way in just the past few years. But release of autonomous leaning vehicles seems stalled. How do you feel about where we are today, and where do you think we will be 1 year from now?
I'm happy to jump in. Let's start with the camera. So, I think we have in many ways entered this trough of disillusionment around autonomy. But I have to give a shout out to everyone who has and does work on autonomy, because if you have or do work on it, you know that we actually have made a lot of progress. And I think it's easy from the outside looking in to say, gosh, where are these infamous autonomous vehicles? That being said, it's hard. I mean, the human brain is amazing. And even people who study the human brain don't know all the details. So I'm not surprised that being able to reach full autonomy is difficult. I don't think we'll be there, certainly in a ubiquitous way, even a year from now. But because of all the progress that has been made, whether it's in computing, large-scale computing, in computer vision, in machine learning and deep learning, have also brought all these other technologies, which I'm sure my panelists will talk about, that are improving safety and driving and road transportation. And I think that's the awesome part.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like to me, DeepMap was founded about 3 years ago. At that time, that was probably like the hype of the autonomy, right? I feel like at that time, probably a lot of people, especially industry analysts, were maybe over optimistic. And even though a lot of, let's say, scientists and engineers are doing the constant reality check, saying like autonomy will take many years to actually become a mainstream phenomenon, their voices were sort of buried. And now when this time of the year, like maybe this is time to do a reality check. No, it doesn't take 3 years to develop a self-driving car. It takes many more years and much more resource than a lot of the industry analysts have anticipated. But just, as Jennifer has said, people who are working in this field, you can see all the great leaps that we have made in the past few years, counting all the great companies, and there are people coming from Cruise, coming from Nauto. Many people are working actively in this field, and to know that we have made a lot of progress not only on the software side, but also on the hardware side as well. LiDAR sensors, cameras, better computing, and whatnot. So I don't know, a year from now, I think people will become, I don't know, the tide will change again, is my prediction. People will become more optimistic, given the progress that we can make in this time.
Yeah. I think a lot of education will happen between now and a year from now into where exactly are we today, from level 2+ and then more advanced autonomy, and then educating the people using shuttles with no steering wheels and no gas pedals and brakes, and how do you interact with each other when that shuttle is being hit by a truck, or how do you interact when you have a self-driving truck, semi-self-driving truck on the freeway, and that there's an accident happening. But I think there's going to be a lot of education that will happen between now and a year from now. You're right, a lot of development has happened, but I'm flabbergasted that everybody expects autonomous cars to be on the road a year from now. And come on, it used to take 5 to 7 years to bring a car to road. So we dialed that down to 3 to 5 years, and that's a lot of progress. So nobody in this industry should expect to have mass production self-driving cars on the road in 2021. But I think a lot of the people in the industry have agreed that enough of this PowerPoints and marketing buzz. Let's talk about safety, security. Let's talk about what's important if we want to build a credible product. I mean, we have NVIDIA here in the room that's been promoting AI and developing AI, and you guys have also, took a really critical step in building awareness around what's self-driving today, what is important for autonomy, safety, security. I think there's a lot of initiatives where car makers are joining forces to bring a common language around how we're talking about different levels, are these the right levels, and I think we should dive into this a little more today.
That's next.
But a year from now, I think we'll see probably a little more research and development vehicles. I think we'll see more geo-fenced areas expanded. I think we'll see more cities being open to allowing and encouraging and embracing the testing of different levels of autonomy. And I'm hoping to get in at least 4 car makers and 3 suppliers. No, but I think all of us are hoping to, through our technology, to also explore not just how we can enhance our product, but how can we enhance the experience of the users of those vehicles.
Excellent. I will just add on there that I came to this field not quite 4 years ago, and I was one of these people that ate up all of those words. You know, it's like 2020, 2021, it's coming, it's gonna be here. I heard every CEO put their date on there. I'm sure I have the notes that I took, you know, where everyone was saying we were going to be, and it's hard. I mean, I'm chugging out of that trough to get through the despair, but it's not moving fast enough. So Manuela, you queued this up very well. There's been some concern around the SAE levels of autonomy. I'm a proud member of the Society of Automotive Engineers, and I scold them every chance I get at what they have built. Some in the industry have called for scrapping the levels altogether and redefining the definition of autonomous drive. How do you each feel about this construct and vehicles associated with the respective levels?
Well, maybe I can shortly start. I think it had to start somewhere, right? That's the reality of it. Somebody had to start in defining, putting some definitions, and because there's a lot of companies out there that are just doing their thing. And it has to mean something. It has to adhere to the highest levels of security. We're building cars. We're building cars that are going to be on the road with different elements around them. So they have to be automotive grade. So I think the background of these levels is good. I think the way they have been defined is not so optimal because I don't think every part were understood at the time that they were created. Hence, we're dealing with this. Why are we even doing level 3? So let's just keep level 3 altogether. Okay, then. Why is it there still? So I think that the intention is good, but I think we need to collectively work together and understand that for the greater good of humanity and how we're going to move into a new world of mobility and transportation, we absolutely need to understand that we need to have safety first in mind. And that has to be at the core of every company that is bringing or thinking about developing automotive software or hardware. And I'm sure you guys are looking the same.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, like I think level 3 is so puzzling to a lot of people, mainly because it's very hard to define what is how to qualify a level 3 system, right? Because level 3 is this weird notion that there's a handoff between a self-driving car and the driver, and how to make that decision on when to hand off and when you can actually allow the car to make its own decisions is very, very challenging. To some people or to some companies, I should say, who have done this research, they said like the decision to make handoff correctly is even harder to get solving the level 4 problem. So let's just scratch this notion and let's work on level 4 instead. I mean, as you know, we are basically a supplier in the self-driving world, and we talk to a lot of potential customers. What we have observed is that, you know, if you apply the level 3 notion in a generic sense, it's very dangerous. You know, for the reason I just talked about, that you can't design a generic system that somehow will magically decide, yep, I can't handle this, and I'm very certain I can wake up my driver waiting 2 seconds and make a correct call. Right? Actually, various research has shown that's not possible to get drivers' attention very quickly. But it's possible to apply this notion in very specific context, right? You know, I think in the example that was shown on screen, traffic jam chauffeur, yes, you still need some attention from the driver, but you can alleviate the, let's say, the stress of the driver to a great extent. Or applying to more restricted geographic environment or more restricted speed limit scenarios, this becomes actually doable and also safe to do it as well, because that's ultimately the bar that every car maker or every service provider needs to have. Like, you have to have your system to be safe enough, no matter which level label that you put on your service.
So I asked Stacey to include this graphic when we were talking about SAE levels, because from my point of view, although I agree with everything that you mentioned about we had to start somewhere with the SAE levels, but I found it very, very theoretical, and partially because they were created before a lot of the technology was developed. The other problem I have with the SAE levels is they're not very consumer friendly, quite frankly. And at the end of the day, we are serving consumers. And so this was created by a venture capitalist of all people. But what I like about it is it's very easy to understand, right? It divides between is the technology, in this case, i.e. the car, doing X things, or is the person responsible for doing X things? And I think that's a much easier way to educate consumers on these various levels. So if you buy a car with automatic emergency braking, what is the car doing versus what am I responsible for doing? So that's why I thought we should show it, because it is, at the end of the day, as you mentioned, education is one of the things we have to do. We already see in production vehicles today that really only have what I would say level 2 type technologies. The consumers are confused, right? You can go on YouTube, forget about Tesla videos, of which there are many, but there's also videos of all sorts of other production vehicles where, even the dealer didn't know how the technology worked. And as we advance through these technologies, we really have to spend a lot of time educating consumers. Otherwise, our safety goals are really going to go out the door. And so that's one of the things I like about this, is at least it's a more simple way to try to explain these SAE levels.
Excellent. I agree with, I think, absolutely every word all of you said. I get a lot more militant about it and would say that erase the middle column, 0, 1, 2 is ADAS, and only 4, 5 is autonomy. Like, you shouldn't even be allowed to say the word autonomous unless the human is not supposed to have input, other than basically it's not autonomous unless one of my kids can walk up to it and say where they want to go and it goes. That's it.
The dealers are talking about, level 2 as autonomous. You're right. And I have a friend who just bought a car, a Subaru, that is a fine car. And she came to me and said, I know you work in automotive, I have a self-driving car. I'm like, no, I don't. And she's like, yes, I do. I just press a button, it just goes. And I'm like, no, you don't. And do not say that or think that or do that. Your eyes on the road. But that's the fundamental problem that we are seeing. And I have to say, I don't know how it is for you, but when building teleoperations, that we have to explain to people that, all right, so there's autonomy. You have to wrap your head around that. And then there's a human and there's a driver. What? But there's no driver in autonomy. But no, there is a driver. Because it's a safety driver that is actually remotely making sure that when the autonomy system is failing, there's a human component that's taking over and providing that safety net. But we have to be able to speak coherently about this. And it's very difficult when we're talking outside a group of people that understand technology and understand these terms, versus when you go to a dealer. But I want that car that has these cameras that are looking at me and can understand me, and that, they have these super cool maps, and there's nobody behind them. The wheel is moving along. But I know there's somebody there. So it's tough. And I know I said it has to start somewhere, but I think collectively we have, not everybody that was supposed to be involved in putting together some sort of distinction was involved. And that's something that we're trying to fix today, whether it's through PAVE or whether it's through different voices in the industry, like yours, Stacey, like Alex Roy, and others. But I think it's important that we start educating, and the way we speak about things in our press releases, in our marketing materials, in our customer meetings, it has to start here. Because if we don't use this language, how can we expect from the consumer, my mom, to understand what we're doing?
We have to have a common and clear nomenclature when we're talking about these technologies. And I think that's actually, not to get too women, but it's like, I think that's the kind of frankness that, and concern that we can probably bring to bear that, might not be present in others. Okay, so how do you view the impact of autonomy on personally owned vehicles? Will they exist, or will there be fleets of robo-taxis?
I firmly believe that not if, it's a matter of time, when self-driving becomes a reality, the personal ownership of consumer cars will go down, right? Because especially if you look at San Francisco, the younger kids don't really need to get a driver license anymore because they have access to Lyft, Uber, and or maybe little scooters that they can pick up, right? And then actually, generally speaking, like I'm sure in this room full of women in this group, you must have seen stats on like the utilization rate of personal cars is extremely low, right? Like most of the times your cars are sitting in the garage or in the parking lot, right? Just in the society as a whole, actually even policy-wise, once autonomy is here, we should have policies to encourage shared ownership, and then leveraging, how should I say, the fleet services that we have, rather than encouraging people owning more cars. That's my personal belief.
I'm mixed fence here. Because I hope we don't live a world where we're not gonna own a car. Because I still want to take my car to a racetrack and drive it on this beautiful winding road.
That's leisure driving.
That's not if you see me, not if I.
But does it
if you
have
drive
to-
like I do.
Does it have to be your car?
It has to, because I like the way it is. I like the way it fits, and I like there's certain things about it that I still want it to be mine.
And your daily
I'm
driver
not
as
renting
well?
my phone. Like, why should I do it in my car? But no, for the masses in general, sure. I think there needs to be, like, there's no reason for a family of 7 people to have 7 cars. That I agree with. But in terms of generation of today, the people that live in the cities, at some point, these 17 to 24-year-old, they're gonna get married, they're gonna have kids, they probably wanna go skiing or diving or whatever it is. And for that, I think they need some means of transportation. And we need to think about how we're gonna solve that. I don't want us to wrap our head around, okay, we're gonna remove personal, like, ownership of cars without giving something back that's gonna continue allowing people to have hobbies. I hope we're not gonna take away hobbies from people, because we're gonna take away a very important skill, which is learning how to drive and knowing how to drive and deal with that complex activity. So I think we need to have answers to how are we gonna fill that gap before we remove car ownership. I hope.
So are you a card-carrying member of the Human Driving Association, Manuela?
I certainly don't see how we can start not with fleets, though, because we're gonna start with level 4 driving, right? And level 4 driving basically means there's a whole series of fences, whether it's being geo-fenced or speed fenced or weather fenced, and within the fence, it's driving itself, and the person can sit back and relax and doesn't have to intervene. But the vehicle can't operate outside those fences. So you're talking about a vehicle with lots of technology. Yes, prices are dropping, but that takes time. Would you personally want to buy an expensive car that can only drive you around, suburban Palo Alto? Probably not. So I don't see how you don't start with just fleets.
Sure.
However, I mean, here in the US, we have a huge population of people who live in rural areas. It's much harder to have fleets serving rural areas. I think that's true. And so there does need to be a solution. And maybe that means they have to eventually, they'd have to be basically level 5.
Yeah.
So that you can drive everywhere and in every situation. So that's a long way away. They'd have to be cheap enough. But it would be hard to imagine fleets operating very rural areas.
Yeah, so shuttles plus trucks, right? Let's not forget, it's not just about people.
Yes.
Yeah. Transportation, it's about goods, and I think shuttles, trucks will be the first that will hit that mark.
All right. Do you think that these fleets that might exist, will they be operated by their developers or via other platforms such as ride sharing, or if in the case of freight, the current freight operators?
we have seen, again, based on the people we have been exposed to, we have seen a mixture. And actually, honestly speaking, if someone has the choice, a company has a choice, every company wants to be a service provider developer because that's almost like the tip of the pyramid. Everyone wants to operate a sharing with a fleet service platform, like Uber, like Lyft, or maybe create something new. But honestly speaking, like, the whole society, they can't have that many segregated services, right? So what I see in the future is that, there will be some consolidation, maybe Uber or Lyft, some of the ride sharing companies that we're familiar with ended up taking more of the market, or it could be the flip, some of the developers, like Waymo, like Cruise, if they have the better technology and people like to use them, and then eventually maybe their ride sharing app takes more market share. So anyhow, just my observation, like, given a choice, everyone wants to be that operator because that's where the profit margin is. But who can actually claim that is still to be played out.
Well, at the end of the day, it's about consumer, right? And I have marketing background, so it's all about brand, and it's all about how the reason that people want to use Waymo is because it's got a brand around it, right? And it's cool, and Uber the same. When it started, it was about that. It's not anymore. It was when it started. For a little bit. Come on.
Best caveat ever.
When it started for a little bit, it was cool. Then not so much, but it was like that, right? So it has to deal with brands, and this is why you gave up Uber, because of the brand and what the executives stand for and whatnot. But I think we've also we're seeing that consolidation happening today, at least in car sharing, with Car2Go and Reach Now joining forces, right? BMW and Daimler. Who thought that whoever thought like 10 years ago that BMW and Daimler will work together?
Oh, they're getting married. They are totally
And not
totally
just that,
moving
but working
in.
on the
Yeah.
autonomy system, and then you're also looking at, Ford, we have Lynn here. So Ford doing the Chariot, and then the whole, beyond just the car, building a car for consumers. So it's about creating a mobility ecosystem. So I still think that, in my mind, that car makers and some of the big players like Apple or Google, and I don't want to say that name anymore, the one that starts with ooh, and Lyft, will continue. But if you're looking at the small providers, like small business providers that are thinking about building car sharing, I think it's going to work in very narrow areas, but not mass distribution across the globe. Ultimately, people travel, they want to have the same system, they want to have the same phone and access the same app and have a seamless experience no matter what. And I can't see that happening with a small company.
One of the things you earlier mentioned was there's also the transfer of goods, right? And so
Yeah.
at Nauto, we sell our technology only to commercial fleets. It's not a consumer technology. And so I think also on the fleet side, we get our customers talk to us about what do we think about autonomy and when that will happen and how it will affect commercial fleets. And will all these companies have to run their own autonomous fleets to get their goods delivered, or will there be some consolidation in that space? And even on the commercial fleet side, you have already some companies that are more like fleet managers, right? They manage their fleet. So you could also potentially see consolidation there on the delivery of goods as well. And of course, there's some tech companies that are also trying to disintermediate the goods delivery. So I do see a lot of scale in doing things fleet way, especially when we have autonomy. But like I said, I also think it's a while away.
You guys are so perfect. Flowing right into the my next question is, based on the balance of personally owned vehicles versus fleets, how do you see the OEM environment shaking out? What will happen to the manufacturers, dealers, service stations, financing, insurance, aftermarket, and you name it? Who's gonna live and who's gonna die?
We should have had an OEM at the table. Like, how many car maker representatives are in the room? Just land.
Just one. All right, let's get going.
I think we were talking about diversity and inclusion. Hello. Where's the rest? It's, yeah, I don't know which. I feel like I reached.
Well, I think we're going to continue to see a lot of consolidation on the OEM side, right? I mean, making cars anyways is really expensive and long endeavor. And then this shift towards electrification plus autonomy, that is not cheap. And so I think that's why we're starting to see all these partnerships. People are starting to realize it's hard to go it alone. And a lot of automakers over the years have already consolidated, right? Most of the big ones these days actually own 10 or 11 brands that used to be individual companies at some point. So I expect more consolidation. I don't think all of the OEMs that exist today will survive in name. They may still exist, but they, were eaten up by someone else. So that's my opinion on the OEM side. One of the other things you talked about was insurance.
Yeah.
Insurance companies are worried about what autonomy means for their future. And in some ways, I think all these technologies from Nauto today to autonomy in the future does mean a lot more data, right? Data around driving, data around crashes. You get to see a lot more of what's been happening or what happened in a situation. That could be good for insurance in that when you have better and more data, you can make better decisions about how you insure, about rates, and things like that. And so I really think insurers need to think about what they're going to insure in the future. Right now, we insure drivers usually, right? And we use this mishmash of pretty still high-level demographic data to insure individuals, consumer drivers. But with all this more data coming on board, one, can we do a better job of how we make those actuarial decisions? And then two, when we have autonomous, what are we going to insure? Is it more like product liability, where you're insuring the system and is that going to be separate from insuring sort of the mechanical, electrical part of the car, rather than the individual sitting in the car who supposedly will have to do nothing, so why need to insure them?
And what happens when you have teleoperations? Right? And because then you will indeed have another driver at the end of the spectrum that is remotely operating your vehicle when the AP system has failed or has encountered a situation it cannot handle. So, or a sensor has failed. So you will have a driver. It's funny because as an anecdote, I was talking to our insurance the other day.
I was just going to say, what is going on with your insurance company?
It's very hard to explain to them what we do. There's a driver, safety driver. Okay, is that guy driving? No. Who's driving? There's not a driver. The car is moving and there's no driver.
Mhm.
Yes. Who's driving? But there's a driver. Where? 5,000 miles from here. And does that guy, does he have proper license? Can he maneuver the vehicle? Does he have the right information? Right? So you're right. It's going to be even more complex for the insurance companies, but even more complex for companies like ours that are trying to build a product that actually makes sense and helps. And even more harder for car makers that are probably going to try to spread not just the joy of bringing autonomy to the market, but responsibility too. So I think it's interesting, and it's our role to educate the insurance companies before they start doing something totally crazy like those levels. So it's very important that we start reaching out to them, and we are, from a teleoperation side of designated driver, we are talking to all of the insurance companies and educating them, and I'm sure you are as well, right? But it's difficult because of the timeline, right? It's not immediate deployment in mass production vehicles. It's very limited geofenced areas, limited production, R&D still, and maybe some commercial vehicles having some sort of level 4, level 5 in the next years with all of our technologies incorporated. But should that be the reason for changing completely the insurance today? No. At least that's how I think.
Okay, this is juicy stuff. I love it. As we reach the cusp of fully autonomous vehicles, what do you think are the biggest barriers to moving autonomy forward? Consumer acceptance, public policy, the technologies themselves, infrastructure? What do you think? What's stopping us?
I'm the biggest barrier. Okay, so you listed a few, right? Like technology, public acceptance, public policy, infrastructure. All of these four things, I think three of them are all solvable. Like technology is only a matter of time. I firmly believe that. Infrastructure, there is a debate whether or not we need to make infrastructure changes in order to support autonomy. I personally believe the answer is no. Like in some cases, if you can afford to make changes to the infrastructure, great, we'll make autonomy happen sooner, but it's not a must-have. Public acceptance or customer acceptance will happen if they get it right and it gives a very good, smooth, safe experience. It will happen, right? Naturally, just like how people switch from regular phones to smartphones once they see it, yeah, it looks good, and it hopefully doesn't spy on me as well. The piece that is, I wouldn't say it's like the hardest, but probably has the biggest uncertainty is public policy. And this is the area I feel like, I don't know, our government or governments around the world, if they make the right decisions, they can actually probably have the biggest influence on either the speed and both the speed and then the safety aspect of autonomy, with very big impact, right? And then, obviously some of the governments are very, very aggressive in this aspect. I can name a few already, like Japan did a consortium on HD mapping actually. The Japanese government put all the private companies together, saying we're gonna do this and we're gonna do this together under the guidance of Japanese government, right? Singapore government is another example. China government is going extremely aggressively on self-driving. A lot of the European countries are also pursuing this very aggressively. So in this aspect, whether or not the public policy can make the right decisions to help autonomy move forward, to me is actually not a barrier, but it's one of the probably the biggest deciding factor,
A boost?
a boost to whether or not self-driving can happen sooner or much later.
And of the ones you named, are there any that it's like they got it right and it's accelerating?
For sure, right? Again, coming in a DeepMap, we're in the mapping company, we're in the mapping space. We know some of the, let's say, industry trend more in mapping space. The fact that Japanese government put together this so-called dynamic mapping platform, DMP for short. They not only map, they're putting efforts to map all the highways in Japan, certain urban major roads, and they also made a move to actually buy Usher, the mapping company in the US as well, to assist their Japanese OEM to expand to China, to US. Right? China government has various policies to give financial as well as technology incentives to attract companies to either set up the office in certain locations or help build an ecosystem so that the different suppliers can work together. So yeah, I feel like this is an area that probably we can see the biggest influence, either positively or negatively, depending on what policies we get.
So they're creating a hospitable environment so that the technology can naturally accelerate through collaboration, et cetera. Yeah. What do you think, Jennifer? What's the barrier? What's stopping us?
I generally agree with everything we said. All things are solvable. It's a question of time and if you take the right approach. One of the things that I spend more time thinking about is public acceptance, because at Nauto, we aren't working on developing autonomous technology, right? But we're using some of the same technologies that are in
autonomous technology to help drivers today drive smarter. So for example, we're well known for our distraction detection and in-cabin alerts that help drivers know that they're driving distracted, pay attention, and therefore prevent most commonly rear-end crashes. But it could be all kinds of crashes. What I like about that is when you talk about public acceptance, sometimes it's getting used to it, right? So you mentioned you get in an autonomous vehicle and you see it works and that it's safe, you're going to get used to it. Another way of getting used to things is that you get used to the technology, right? So, you know, you're a commercial fleet driver, you now have heard that you have this thing in your car and it uses computer vision and machine learning and helps you do your job better. Wow, now AI isn't as scary as it sounds when I read in the media that, you know, AI is coming for my job and I'm going to be out of work soon. That, you know, I think that helps that progression that we're going to see, whether it's in mapping or remote teleoperations, helps public acceptance versus what we maybe previously thought, especially outside the industry, that all of a sudden we were going to wake up one day and there were going to all these robot taxis taking over the world, right? Of course, that sounds scary, but it's not going to happen that way. And I think we can help on the public acceptance front. It makes sense to me that today people take these surveys, right? AAA does a survey and it says,
Oh my God.
77% of people would never get an autonomous vehicle. I mean, they probably have only seen the scary cartoon of this Terminator car. Yeah, I'm not going to get in that.
Or maybe that's my mom. Yeah.
Yeah,
Public acceptance, and I think for us, public education is first, and then that leads to public acceptance. And recently, I think on July 4th, I think there's two guys from Samsung here in the room. There's Rita and there's Mark. Yes, there's diversity. There's some guys. But talking about how do we bring these super technical elements and the way we talk about technology, like teleoperations and HD maps and then remote monitoring and monitoring of the driver, right? How do you explain that? I think the best way to do it is to find some ways to connect with the public and explain the benefits and explain the fact that, yep, that could be a fun job for you at the end of the day, right? There's not going to be, you know, you're not going to be a truck driver, but you're going to still be able to drive remotely various vehicles. And I think one way to do it is to explore with various elements of technology like virtual reality and then 5G, it's coming, so we have to take advantage of it.
Is it?
And it's
Is
great.
it? Because I've been hearing about it forever.
It's great, trust me. The numbers we've seen for teleoperations in terms of latency, incredible. Like lower teens over 5G versus.
But when?
It happened, baby. It was in July in UK.
Okay.
It's coming. It's on its way here. Mark is here. He's going to tell you more about it. Talk to Mark at the end of this event. But I think it's important to have, before we do the acceptance, is the education, and it's the education of the government as well. And I think it starts with us at the end of the day. I want to applaud California for really encouraging and being the state that has promoted, you know, the deployment of various technologies in geofenced areas first. And I think without California, I don't think we would have seen things in Detroit or in Ottawa or in Sweden, Norway, Germany, right? Or even Japan. I think the stuff that we do here is very important, and we should continue in doing that.
Okay, I'm going to sneak one more in here before we go to questions. I'm an urbanist, and Alice and I are the no car people in the automotive industry. We ride our bikes everywhere. Oh, there, Alice. And but I'm also big on transit as well. I mean, cars are good for certain jobs, just not in, you know, so much. So will we see autonomy in transit? Is this something that's going to happen, and will it happen at any time before, after our cars and trucks?
Stay tuned. Wait, check out LinkedIn on August 27th, Barb?
Why?
Level 4
You smell a
shuttles
scoop.
and remote operations, that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh my goodness, okay.
I mean, is it actual transit or is it closed campus?
It's,
Blah, blah.
hey, don't say that.
I'm
It's
gonna stop.
There's no blah, blah, blah. It's like, again, it's automotive industry, right?
I've been waiting.
But it takes a long time to build things for automotive and bring them into an environment like this. I think we're making good steps. I think all of us here at the table and everybody in the room, right? We're making the most effort to bring technology to market. But I think we also need to be sensitive to the fact that it needs to be safe, to be functional in an environment like this. And I don't even think we need transit in a downtown area. Paris has decided to close down downtown at various times of the day and just allow pedestrians.
And priorité peloton.
Papa.
What if you're old and what happens
Then-
about this thing?
Yes, but then there's different, micro mobility solutions that don't have to be cars or buses or whatever, right?
Honda has a self-driving chair. It's actually a pretty funny video that you can find on self-driving chair. It wasn't
Self-driving chair?
No.
Self-driving shoes are next.
Well, and actually, I think is it Hyundai who did the exoskeletons, which I thought were really amazing, for people who have mobility, their own personal mobility issues. And what do you think, Wei, Jennifer, do you have anything on autonomous transit?
I think self-driving buses make even more sense than Google Taxi. You move a lot more people around. Actually, the technology is simpler because you go on fixed routes, and then you know exactly what's ahead of you. HD mapping will work beautifully. So, I mean, from both financial point of view, from saving the environment point of view, and simplifying the technology point of view, it makes a lot of sense.
There's certainly not a technological reason why we couldn't bring self-driving technology to buses and other forms of transportation.
Okay, go do it. Okay, with that, I will turn it over. Are there any questions from our audience? Carolina.
So I wanted to ask about two topics we discussed here slightly already. So the crossroads of micromobility and autonomy. In my mind, it's very interesting. So on one hand, it could actually help us make this transition from this ownership approach to the trip-based approach of which vehicle we're choosing. But on the other hand, micromobility devices are usually like $500, $600, so putting all the sensors through, which is so expensive.
Yeah.
And, so there's a lot of ways that we can look around at this as the crossroads of those two technologies. And I was wondering whether your organizations are looking at this, and if so, what are your views? And
I'll speak more personally.
Okay.
I have always been a believer in mixed modalities, right? Especially because I am also an urban dweller. I don't personally own a car. I haven't owned a car in years, but I commute down to Palo Alto every day. And so whether there's autonomy or not, I think there are so many benefits to using various types of transportation for various things, right? The car is not always the answer for what I'm trying to do. I don't think that you necessarily, there are cases where you might want, micro mobility solutions to be autonomous, but I also agree with one of the things Manuela said earlier is there's also a reason that we want to have our own control over things. So, I think I used to work at Waymo, and one year we did our Google Netherlands office did a April Fool's joke on a autonomous bicycle.
Yeah.
I mean, do we really want our bicycle to be autonomous? I don't know. Maybe someone does.
Yes, we do. It's for shared rebalancing. It's charging, no, for e-bikes, not while you're riding it. But yes, we do.
Self-balancing.
Yeah. There you go.
Bikes for that, right? You have electric bikes, you have motors. I think that's great. I'm with you. I'm a big believer in shared mobility. I also do that. I don't just drive. Traffic in Seattle has gone crazy lately. So I love, using, whether it's Car2Go or one of the mobility providers that have a driver and take me places, or whether it's my bike or public transportation. I love that. I wish public transportation was better because I would absolutely love that. I would use it every day. I'm European. I'm used to paying very little for going in a lot of places. But I think in terms of cost, right, Carolina, your question was how does that economy of scale apply? Well, when you're looking at a small scooter or another 2 or 4 wheeler that you're parking at the end of the block, I think to put a camera on it and then to add different sensors, that adds cost. And sure, there are scenarios that you could leverage, right? You could totally do teleoperations with that scooter because you could, at the end of the day, take it, back it up, or move it to a charging location remotely. You don't have to physically bring somebody to do every single scooter. At the end of the day, will we see that mass production? Probably not. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think it's going to make sense.
Depends on the kids want to bike or not.
This kid does. Sorry, in the back. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Xantha Brusso with AAA, and I had a question actually about policy. I think it looks like there may be some federal legislation this fall on autonomous vehicles, another try for that in Congress. But I think they're really struggling with how to regulate autonomous vehicles within this structure. If you're looking at level 0 through 2 versus 4 and 5, and there's it's very difficult for regulators to regulate the whole spectrum. So do you think that that's potentially this federal regulation should really regulate the whole spectrum of autonomous vehicles, or really just focus, have sort of separate regulation for the 0 through 2 and separate regulation for more full autonomy?
Well, my take on that is that full autonomous cars are very different from ADAS systems, which are level 1 and 2, right? Like, they deserve to have different policies because in one system, humans are in charge. In another system, cars are in charge. Since you come from AAA, right? Like, even insurances should be different as well. Because one is insuring humans, the other one is insuring the fleet, basically. Anyway, that's my take. And
You're adding different, also in insurance, I don't know what are you looking at. I know that my insurance is looking like how many accidents have you had? What kind of accidents, right? So I think it's going to be a factor when you're going to continue exploring on how are you balancing the new insurance for these level 4 or 5 vehicles.
I think, just to add one more thing, like, when I was talking about public policy, right, I was discussing, like, government can really actually play a critical role in ensuring the safety aspect of self-driving, right? So, let's say the federal government wants to come up with regulations for level 4 and 5. My personal opinion, at least on that, is that the focus should be how can the government come up with not only policies, but ways to actually, let's say, benchmark or test a self-driving system is actually indeed safe, right? Because today, as a driver, you need to pass driver test to get your driver license. Such motion sort of exists in some locations, but not consistently. And definitely not in the US yet, right? And actually, because we have an office in China, but in China, what they do is that in order for anybody, any company to run self-driving on the public road, you actually need to pass your self-driving license test. In the test field, right, you need to do certain maneuvers under certain conditions and whatnot.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Did you say that there is a self-driving test?
Yes.
Where is this?
In China.
In China. They have a self-driving test.
So
Can we use that self-driving test here?
You probably should. So my point being, like, from the government perspective or from the regulation perspective, right? Like, there may be, I think there should be a need for the government to demand certain, let's say, safety quality of all the self-driving service providers, right? Because the car should be at least as safe as human drivers. And right now, because we don't have that, we basically have to trust the service providers' own members. If there's anything government can do, maybe the government can demand certain test members.
The other challenge of regulating levels 1 and 2 at the same time as 4 and 5 is you're regulating different things, right? Levels 1 and 2 exist in consumer vehicles today, and it's generally easier to regulate something that exists. With levels 4 and 5, you're regulating something that is basically in theory. And so what do you regulate? And as Wei said, one of the things you can do is regulate how you're able to test them and develop them and how they can interact in the road, but you're not actually regulating that technology. It does not exist today, and you also run the risk of over-regulating, right? Before it exists, and then it never actually comes to be. And so there's a different balance in what you're trying to achieve and target. And so if you group it all together, I do think you end up either you focus on 1 and 2, and therefore you end up over-regulating 4 and 5, or maybe you just are totally pro-innovation, don't want to regulate anything, and maybe you're missing something that you could regulate in 1 and 2.
Plus, we're not even looking at, we're starting to talk about different standards, right, for autonomy, and there's no standards for teleoperations. So whatever we had for functional safety and ISO 26262 right now might not apply for level 5. So you're right. I think you'll need to look at bucketing these.
I think we have time for one more question. Lynn, did you want to go ahead?
One thing I think about is the safety of vulnerable passengers. For example, now you put your child on a school bus, a transit bus, a carpool, or a rideshare vehicle, all of which have human adult drivers that are entrusted for the safety of the child, for example. But if you have an automated vehicle of some sort, there's a number of scenarios that can go wrong. Even if the vehicle doesn't crash, it can go to the wrong place, or the child can get out of the wrong place. It doesn't know not to drive into a flood or a civil unrest scenario. Someone can step in front of the vehicle, it'll stop, and someone breaks the window and grabs the kid, where a human driver could save them. So what do you see needing to take place to where parents will entrust the safety of their children to automated traffic?
Cameras, HD maps,
Manuela jokes, but when Stefan, the CEO of Nauto, first raised funds for the company, we're about 4 years old now, and he mentioned that what he wanted to build included a system that had both internally facing and externally facing cameras. Lots of VCs laughed him out of the room. They're like, oh, but autonomy is coming. Why do you need an internally facing camera? Even if autonomy is here, per your point, do you want an internally facing camera that is looking at what's left in the vehicle?
Yes.
Looking at your child that you might have put in the vehicle? And by the way, along the way, there's lots of reasons to have an internally facing camera, right? Whether even with level 2 technologies, you want to know that the driver is actually paying attention and can take control if they need to. But certainly in the world of autonomy, yeah, I would want an internally facing camera.
Yeah, for sure. And this is again where teleoperations, if there's something going on with the vehicle, a teleoperator can take over and bring the car back to its trajectory, or even talk to the person. Maybe there's a kid that's just no malice, right? Let's forget about the malice. Let's think that there's a kid who slept in the back seat on the way from school, and there's the teleoperator who can talk to the kid and create that, humanize that technology, right? Like bring the human in that environment, even though there is no bus driver. And this is where actually insurance comes to play. But yeah, I think you need all of these elements in addition to the autonomy system that Ford or any other company is building. I think you'll always need a safety net of the teleoperations. You'll need to rely on HD maps, and you absolutely have to have the driver monitoring, who probably in this case will be us, so. Or the environment monitoring, right? for those reasons, scale the business.
Okay, well, with that, I will thank our panelists. This has been very interesting. I loved hearing all your answers. I appreciate your presence and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
And I will turn it over to Indu.
Thanks.
One more big round of applause for this amazing panelist here. Thank you so much for enlightening us today. I'm sure all of us learned so much more, and we thank you for giving us all those insights about what's happening in this field. And just to let you guys know, we are just excited about what we did today and being part of this whole group here. And we wanted to announce what we're planning for next event. We are going to hold another event by Women in Autonomy. It's called Rules of the Road at 4th and Papadopol Center. We'll give you more information on this. Stay tuned in our social media and LinkedIn and all the websites. Other than that, I had a few announcements which I didn't leave it here. So Alison here is a host for Silicon Valley Automotive Open Source Meetup, and she's been doing a great job at that. I've been part of it in the Bay Area, in Santa Clara and Sunnyvale area. So there's a few announcements on that. August 29th in Santa Clara, there is going to be a meetup based on edge computing and AI by Forrest Arandola from DeepScale. September 9th at Sunnyvale, there is a group of people, Uber, W3C, Volvo, and BMW are coming together to discuss about new data standards for telematics. September 19th in Santa Clara, Jim Meissner, from Qualcomm will be there to talk about 5G in automotive. It's all the topics that you want to hear about. And thank you everyone for being here and being part of this incredible inaugural event. And really appreciate you all being here, part of this energy and being part of this discussion. And we're looking forward to seeing you more in these events coming up. And hope to see you. And hope you have a great evening.
Thank you. And the folks at AI for putting all this together. And when I sat down, I said to Wei, I knew a woman put this together because I didn't have to climb onto one of those horrible stools.